He was 6 days past his 17th birthday. 6 days. Most kids that age were worrying about prom, or a driver's license, or whether the girl in homeroom liked them back. 6 days past his 17th birthday, Jack Lucas was lying face down in a trench on a volcanic island in the Pacific, 2 live grenades pinned under his body, waiting for the explosion that was supposed to kill him. He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't old enough to be there. He wasn't legally allowed to be there. He had lied to get there, forged documents to get there, bribed a notary to get there, stowed away on a transport ship to get there. All because a 14-year-old boy in Plymouth, North Carolina, had watched Pearl Harbor burn on a newsreel and decided the United States Marine Corps couldn't win the war without him. They found him after the battle, 300 yards from where his unit had left him for dead. 250 pieces of shrapnel driven so deep into his body that doctors would leave most of them there for the rest of his life. So much metal inside him that 40 years later, he'd still set off airport metal detectors just walking to a gate. He survived. His name was Jacqueline Harold Lucas. At 17 years and 6 days, he became the youngest Marine in the history of the United States Marine Corps to receive the Medal of Honor, and the youngest American serviceman since the Civil War to earn it. And that was only the first time the universe tried to kill him, and failed. This is the story of the boy who refused to die. Jacqueline Harold Lucas was born on Valentine's Day, 1928, in Plymouth, North Carolina. His father was a tobacco farmer. His mother kept the house. It was a small southern town in the middle of the Great Depression, and the Lucas family was like most families in that part of the world, working people who didn't have much and didn't expect much. Jack was big for his age from the start. By the time he was 10, he already looked like a teenager.
How old are you again?
By 13, strangers would mistake him for a man. He was broad-shouldered, thick through the chest, with a jaw that made him look older than he was, and a temper that made him look older still. In 1939, when Jack was 10, his father died. The tobacco farmer who had raised him, disciplined him, taught him how to hunt and how to fight, gone. Jack Lucas, by his own admission later in life, did not handle it well. He described himself as becoming a mean kid. He resented everything. He fought other boys. He ignored his mother. He turned wild in the way that young boys sometimes do when the one person they measured themselves against is suddenly taken from them. His mother, desperate for help, sent him to the Edwards Military Institute in Salemburg, North Carolina, a strict, disciplined place that specialized in taking angry boys and turning them into functioning young men. It worked. Jack thrived in the structure. By 13, he was a cadet captain and captain of the football team. He boxed, he wrestled, he hunted, he rode horses. He was good at every sport he tried. On December 7th, 1941, Jack was 13 years old. He was at Edwards Military Institute when the news came over the radio. The Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. He later said that moment signed and sealed the thing for him. Right there, at 13, he decided he was going to the war. He didn't care how. He didn't care what it took. He just needed to find a way. In August 1942, 8 months after Pearl Harbor, Jack Lucas walked into a Marine Corps recruiting office in Norfolk, Virginia. He was 14 years old. He was 5 feet 8 inches tall. He weighed 160 pounds. He looked, in the right light, like a man. He told the recruiter he was 17. He forged his mother's signature on the consent form. He bribed a notary to certify it. His stepfather came with him. According to Jack, the man was happy to get rid of him, and testified that yes, the boy in front of them was 17 years old and had permission to enlist. The Marine Corps bought it. All of it. Jack Lucas, age 14, shipped to Parris Island, South Carolina, for boot camp. He went through the same brutal training every other Marine went through. The runs, the rifle drills, the hand-to-hand, the sleep deprivation, the screaming drill instructors. And he did it as a kid who couldn't legally drive a car, let alone fire a weapon in combat. He qualified as a heavy machine gunner. He was sent to Camp Lejeune, then to the Marine Corps Air Station in Jacksonville, Florida. Somewhere in the middle of 1943, the Marine Corps figured out what had happened. Jack Lucas wasn't 17. He wasn't 18 by then either. He was still 15. They had a problem. Technically, they could have discharged him for fraud. But Jack had completed training. He was a qualified Marine. He was a giant teenager who could bench press most of his squad. So the Marine Corps compromised. They shipped him to Hawaii and gave him a non-combat job driving trucks at a supply depot near Pearl Harbor. They thought that would satisfy him. It didn't. By January 1945, Jack Lucas was 16 years old and furious. His friends from boot camp were fighting in the Pacific. Marines were dying on Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, the most brutal island fighting in the history of warfare. And Jack was driving a truck in paradise. He started asking around. Which ships were leaving Pearl Harbor? Where were they going? Who was boarding? On January 10, 1945, Private Jack Lucas walked out of his camp, wearing a khaki uniform and carrying a rolled-up bundle of dungarees and field boots under his arm. He didn't check out. He didn't get permission. He just left. He was now, officially, absent without leave. He made his way to the docks and stowed away aboard the USS Duel, a Navy transport ship loaded with Marines of the 1st Battalion, 26th Marine Regiment, 5th Marine Division. He hid in the ship's hold. He slept in storage compartments. He ate food he snuck from the mess. Nobody knew he was on board. The Duel sailed. On February 8, 1945, one day before the Marine Corps would officially declare him a deserter, Jack Lucas came out of hiding. He walked up to Captain Robert Dunlap, commanding officer of C Company, and turned himself in. Dunlap took him to the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Pollock. Pollock had a decision to make. He had a 16-year-old stowaway on a ship already at sea, steaming toward the most heavily fortified island in the Pacific. He couldn't send the kid back. He couldn't throw him overboard. What he could do was bust Lucas down from private first class to private, which he did, and assign him to Dunlap's company as a rifleman. Jack Lucas got what he wanted. He was in a combat unit. He was going to the fight. On February 14, 1945, Jack turned 17 years old in the hold of the USS Duel. There was no party. There was no cake. There was just the slow rhythm of a troop ship moving through the Pacific toward an island he had never heard of. It was called Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima was a fortress. 8 square miles of black volcanic sand and rock, bristling with more than 20,000 Japanese soldiers dug into an elaborate network of tunnels, bunkers, and pillboxes. The Japanese commander, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, had ordered every man under his command to kill 10 Americans before dying himself. There would be no surrender. There would be no retreat. The Japanese had nowhere to retreat to. Iwo Jima was their last line before the home islands, and they intended to bleed the Americans so badly on that beach that Washington would reconsider the invasion of Japan entirely. On February 19, 1945, the 5th Marine Division landed on the black sand beaches of Iwo Jima. 70,000 Marines hit that island over 3 days. 26,000 of them would become casualties. Nearly 7,000 would die. It would become the single bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history. Jack Lucas went ashore on the afternoon of the first day. He was 17 years old. He had never seen combat. And he hit one of the most violent beaches in human history. He later described it simply. Shells were flying, people were being blown apart, and bullets were everywhere. They made a hash of us. On February 20th, D-Day +1, Jack Lucas and 3 other Marines from his rifle team were working their way up from the beach toward the Japanese airfield north of Mount Suribachi. They were moving through a ravine in the volcanic sand, twisting and narrow, with trenches cutting across their path. They stopped to attack a Japanese pillbox. After neutralizing it, the 4 Marines jumped down into one of the trenches to take cover and regroup. They weren't alone. 11 Japanese soldiers were in an adjacent trench. 11 of them, at close range. The 2 groups saw each other at the same moment. The Marines opened fire. Jack Lucas's rifle jammed. He dropped down, working the bolt, trying to clear the jam, and that's when he saw them. 2 Japanese grenades sailing through the air, landing in the dirt of the trench, right at his feet. Nobody else in the trench saw them. The other 3 Marines were firing at the Japanese, focused on the enemy in front of them, completely unaware that 2 live grenades were about to detonate inside their position. Jack Lucas had a fraction of a second to make a decision. He screamed, "Grenade!" He shoved the nearest Marine out of the way. And then he did something that had no rational explanation, no training for, no time to think through. He dove. He threw his body onto the first grenade. While he was falling forward, in the same motion, he reached out with his free hand and dragged the second grenade underneath his body, pushing it deep into the soft black volcanic soil beneath his chest. 2 live grenades, pinned beneath a 17-year-old boy, fuses burning down to 0. The first one exploded. The blast lifted Jack Lucas off the ground and threw him into the air like a rag doll. More than 250 pieces of shrapnel drove into his body, his chest, his arms, his face, his legs. His helmet was blown off. Parts of his uniform were shredded and scattered. The second grenade, for reasons nobody will ever be able to explain, failed to detonate. Jack Lucas landed on his back in the bottom of the trench. He could not move. He could not speak. He could not breathe properly. But he was not unconscious. He was lying there, fully aware, pouring blood from wounds that should have killed him, watching his fellow Marines stand up and continue forward. They thought he was dead. Of course they did. Nobody survives a grenade going off against their chest. They said goodbye the only way Marines in combat can, by finishing what he started. They charged the Japanese position, wiped it out, and moved on. Jack Lucas lay in the trench. Time passed. He didn't know how much. Then a Marine from another unit came walking through the ravine, saw a body, and looked closer. The body was breathing. The Marine shouted for a Navy corpsman. A medic arrived. While the corpsman was treating Jack's wounds, another Japanese soldier appeared at the edge of the trench, cocking his arm to throw another grenade. The corpsman shot him dead before he could release it. Jack Lucas, broken, bleeding, riddled with metal, one eye swollen shut, a hole in his chest, was loaded onto a stretcher and carried back through the battlefield to the beach. He waited there until dark before a boat could take him to a hospital ship offshore. That night, on the USS Samaritan, doctors began the first of 26 operations that would remove hundreds of pieces of shrapnel from his body. They couldn't remove it all. Some of it was too deep. Some of it was too close to organs they couldn't risk. So they left it inside him. For the rest of his life, Jack Lucas would walk through the world with more than 200 pieces of Japanese metal still embedded in his body. He would set off airport metal detectors. He would get strange looks at X-rays. Small pieces of shrapnel would work their way to the surface of his skin for decades, and he would pull them out himself with tweezers. He was 17 years old. He had saved 3 men. He had survived 2 live grenades. And he had, somehow, stayed alive. On October 5, 1945, nearly 8 months after the explosion, Jack Lucas stood on the south lawn of the White House. He was in a Marine Corps dress uniform. He was still in physical therapy, still learning to use his arm again. He was 17 years old. President Harry S. Truman stood in front of him and placed the Medal of Honor, a pale blue ribbon with white stars, around his neck. Truman looked at Jack Lucas, looked at the other 26 servicemen being decorated that day, and said that he would rather have earned the medal than be President of the United States. Jack Lucas, quick-witted even at 17, turned to him and said, "Sir, I'll swap with you." In the crowd were General George Marshall, General George Patton, General Hap Arnold, Admiral Chester Nimitz, and Secretary of Defense James Forrestal. Sitting next to Jack's mother in the front row was General Marshall himself. A 17-year-old tobacco farmer's son from Plymouth, North Carolina, the youngest Marine in the history of the Corps to receive the highest decoration his country could give. There was a parade afterward. Then another 3 days later in New York. Women threw kisses at him from the barricades. Some of them ran out into the street and kissed him directly. He later said, grinning, that as a 17-year-old kid, "I had a hell of a time." The Marine Corps formally discharged him in September 1945, just before the end of the war. They had scrubbed the desertion charge from his record. He had earned it. And then Jack Lucas tried to live a normal life. And the universe kept trying to kill him. He kept his promise to his mother and finished high school. He earned a business degree from High Point University. He opened a company that raised, processed, and delivered beef outside Washington, D.C. He got married 3 times. None of the marriages worked out. In 1961, still restless, still chasing the edge, he joined the United States Army, specifically the 82nd Airborne Division, the paratroopers. Here's the thing about Jack Lucas that almost nobody knew. He was afraid of heights. He had been his whole life. He joined the 82nd Airborne deliberately at age 33 because he wanted to conquer that fear. He wanted to prove to himself that there was nothing left in this world that could break him. On one of his training jumps, both of his parachutes failed. The main chute didn't open. He pulled the reserve. That didn't open either. Jack Lucas fell out of the sky with nothing between him and the ground. He later said he did a last-second roll when he hit, and his stocky build absorbed the rest. He stood up. He walked away. 2 parachutes failed, and he walked away. Years later, his second wife tried to have him murdered. She hired men to kill him. He survived that, too. His house caught fire and burned down. He survived that. Leukemia took him eventually. That's what finally did it. Not the grenades, not the parachutes, not the hired killers, not the house fire. Cancer. At age 80. He wrote his memoir and titled it Indestructible. He couldn't think of another word that fit. Jack Lucas died on June 5, 2008, at a hospital in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, with his wife Ruby and his family around him. He had been on dialysis for his failing kidneys. At the end, he asked the doctors to remove the machine. He was ready. He was 80 years old. He left behind 4 sons, a daughter, 7 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren. Before he died, he donated his Medal of Honor to the United States Marine Corps. They placed it in a sealed compartment inside the hull of the USS Iwo Jima, where it remains to this day, riding inside the ship named for the island that almost took his life. In 2016, the Navy announced that a new Arleigh Burke-class destroyer would be named in his honor. The USS Jack H. Lucas was commissioned in 2023 in the port of Tampa, Florida. A warship bearing the name of the 14-year-old boy who forged his mother's signature, bribed a notary, stowed away on a transport ship, and dove onto 2 live grenades before he was old enough to vote. When they buried him at Highland Cemetery in Hattiesburg, they buried more than 200 pieces of Japanese shrapnel with him. Metal that had been inside his body for 63 years. Metal that had come from 2 grenades thrown by men who expected to kill him on a February morning in 1945. They didn't. The boy from Plymouth, North Carolina, who lost his father at 10, who forged his way into the Marines at 14, who stowed away into combat at 16, who dove onto 2 grenades at 17, who fell from the sky and walked away in his 30s, who outlived assassins and fires and every other thing sent to end him, went into the ground at 80, still carrying the proof of the day he should have died. I hollered to my pals to get out and did a Superman dive at the grenades. That's how he described it to a reporter 8 months after it happened. Matter of fact, no drama. Like it was something any kid would have done. He was 17. He had been a Marine for 2.5 years. And he had just become, by act of Congress, the youngest American to wear the highest medal his country could give him.